Straight ahead on Law and Crime Daily.
The judge has to determine if they can set aside anything they've heard and whether or not they've made up their mind about innocence versus guilt.
Jury selection begins in the Pike County massacre for one of the 4 charged in the case, defendant George Wagner IV. Plus, Gabby Petito's parents seeking $50 million in damages as part of a new lawsuit alleging Moab, Utah police officials were negligent, leading to the 22-year-old's death. And 3 men are sentenced in federal court after being convicted of both state and federal charges in the death of Ahmaud Arbery. And later,
if you go into a room full of Republicans and ask who wants safe schools, everybody raises their hands. You go in a room full of Democrats and ask that same question, everyone raises their hands.
Law and Crime sat down with the father of a Parkland school shooting victim as the penalty phase trial takes a week-long break from proceedings. Law and Crime Daily, covering court cases from coast to coast. Welcome, everybody, to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Jesse Weber in for Brian Buckmeyer. Jury selection is underway in Pike County, Ohio, for one of the 4 family members accused in the Pike County massacre. 8 members of the Roden and Gilly families were shot to death in April of 2016. Now, George Wagner IV faces trial. Law and Crime's Jeanette Levy tells us why picking a jury could be a challenge.
Pike County is a small community. It's the type of place where a lot of people know each other, and that has come up a lot during the first day of jury selection in the trial of George Wagner IV.
Most jurors in the venue, potential jurors who are 18 and over, have heard of the Wagner family, they've heard of the Roden family, they know what happened.
Alan Turkheimer is a jury consultant advising clients on picking jurors. He says simply knowing about the case doesn't mean a person can't serve as a juror.
The key question is, and judges have a lot of discretion here, the judge has to determine if they can set aside anything they've heard and whether or not they've made up their mind about innocence versus guilt.
Finding 12 impartial jurors in Pike County could be a challenge because of the small jury pool. The county has fewer than 28,000 residents. 1,000 prospective jurors filled out this 21-page questionnaire, answering questions about where they get their news, their feelings on the death penalty, and whether they use social media. Wagner's attorneys had asked to move the trial, but Judge Randy Deering said they would try to seat a jury in Pike County before considering a change of venue. News of the murders of 8 members of the Roden and Gilly families in April of 2016 garnered national and international attention, so there's no question people know about the case. The arrests of 4 members of the Wagner family 2.5 years later also made headlines. And just to give you a sense of what's going on in the courtroom, one of the prospective jurors said that she works at a local police department and her father is an EMT who actually responded to one of the Roden crime scenes the morning of the murders. And her mother worked with one of the victims for a short time. In Pike County, Ohio, I'm Jeanette Levy for Law and Crime Daily.
All right, let's break this down. Joining me today are law and crime legal analyst Julie Rendelman and civil rights attorney Joe Richardson. It's good to see you both. Joe, I'll start with you. Chances the judge actually decides to change venue here after everything is said and done?
It would probably be slim is the short. The issue is this is a small county. People are very likely to know about the incident and sometimes each other or someone connected to it. But Ohio's notoriously slim on letting juries be cases be brought into other venues. And in any event, this judge wants to try to get a jury seated in this county first and then cross the bridge if he comes to it as to them not being able to get an objective jury seated.
That would be easier said than done. Julie, we have to make an interesting point here that even though this is a death penalty case, Wagner may never be executed because of this deal that was made by his brother Jake. Can you walk us through it?
Sure. So Jake Wagner pled guilty and entered into a cooperation agreement with the prosecutor, basically giving him a life sentence as long as he testified truthfully against his brother. One of the caveats is that he doesn't want his brother to get the death penalty. And the prosecutor's position is, we'll do that, but you still have to testify. They are not taking it off the table until and unless Jake Wagner testifies and testifies truthfully with regards to what his brother did.
Julie, real quick, have you ever seen a deal like that?
It's interesting because, in New York, we don't have the death penalty. And so I'm not surprised, especially keeping in mind that, can you imagine a brother testifying against his own brother, knowing that he could be the reason that he's put to death. So it makes sense in a case like this that they would ask for, some type of understanding if he's going to testify against his own sibling.
It's a unique deal, but also a very unique set of circumstances, to say the least. Also, out in Ohio, a suspect wanted for the shooting deaths of 4 people is captured hundreds of miles away after a 2-day manhunt. Authorities say 39-year-old Stephen Marlowe was taken into custody in Kansas days after the murders of husband and wife Clyde and Eva Knox and mother and daughter Sarah and Kayla Anderson in the Dayton, Ohio area. The Knox couple were killed in their home, and the Andersons were killed in a separate house. Authorities say the killings happened in the same neighborhood near a home owned by the suspect's parents. Now, police have not said what they believe is a motive in the murders, but they are aware of a video that Marlowe released on TikTok sometime after the shooting, in which he claimed he was a victim of mind control and that he, quote, cannot sit by and be a victim any longer. Our thoughts are not private. I will be launching the first counterattack against mind control in human history. Marlowe will be extradited to Ohio to face charges. And still ahead on Law and Crime Daily, I sat down with the father of Parkland school shooting victim Gina Montalto to talk about the steps that he's taken for change since the shooting. But first, the parents of Gabby Petito announced plans of another lawsuit in connection to the death of their daughter. Welcome back, everybody. A renewed push for solving the 1996 death of 6-year-old JonBenet Ramsey. This as her father remembers the little girl on what would have been her 32nd birthday. JonBenet's story captured the attention of millions when she went missing and was ultimately found dead in the family's basement around Christmas in 1996. It was widely believed that either her mother, her father, or brother killed her, but investigators have never determined who strangled her to death. The daughter of a detective who first proposed the intruder theory that would exonerate the Ramsey family, along with a team of 12 volunteer amateur investigators, are now joining the little girl's father, John, in a new push for DNA testing on her fingernail samples, long johns, and underwear. John proposed updated technology and genealogical tools could be used to identify the beauty queen's killer. The Ramsey family sent a request to Colorado's governor to hand over the investigation to a private company, but he has not made a ruling yet regarding the case. Gabby Petito's family announces they plan to file a wrongful death lawsuit against police in Moab, Utah, alleging negligence that led to her death last year. Joseph and Tara Petito and Nicole and Jim Schmidt are seeking $50 million in damages against the Moab Police Department, including 3 of its officers and 10 other unnamed defendants. The family claim negligent failure in the investigation into the alleged assault between Petito and her fiancé Brian Laundrie while the two were on a cross-country road trip prior to her murder. Petito was killed in September last year, her body found a week after she was reported missing near a remote campground in Grand Teton National Forest. Laundrie was also found dead weeks later after he returned home to Florida without her. A notebook found near his remains included a confession to killing his fiancée. In August, the couple were recorded on body cameras speaking to Moab officers after having a verbal and physical fight. Petito's family say those officers failed in their duty to protect their daughter.
I again, don't want to get into specifics of what happened that day. There's a lot of information that has been made available, but there's much information that is not yet available publicly. But I will say that we do agree with the findings of the investigative report that the officers failed to recognize the serious danger that she was in and failed to investigate fully and properly. They did not have the training that they needed to recognize the clear signs that were evident that morning that Gabby was a victim and that she was in serious need of immediate help. It was also clear from the officers themselves and the findings of the report that they did not understand the law and did not apply the law properly in Gabby's situation.
Julie, clearly this is a very big development, but do you think that this is a strong case? I mean, the question is, if the officers acted differently, would Gabby be alive?
And that's an impossible question to answer in a sense. First of all, hindsight 2020. Do I think that they acted negligently when it came to what happened? Absolutely. I mean, this is a domestic violence case. had they made an arrest, they would have arrested one or both of them. That would have guaranteed an order of protection put in place and would have given off what we call a cooling off period, allowing them to separate not just for the night, but perhaps longer. And so they didn't do that. They didn't investigate. And that's a real problem. The problem for the family of Gabby Petito is, was it foreseeable at the end of the day that a death would have occurred? And that I'm not so sure of. And I think the other issue that's going to come up is whether or not there's any immunity for the officers in Utah regarding this type of civil litigation.
I see this, Joe, as having big implications for other police departments. So it makes me wonder, if you were the Moab Police, would you fight this, or do you settle it out of court?
I might fight it in the initial moment. If I thought that I could get rid of it in an early dispositive motion or a later dispositive motion based on immunities or issues of law, then maybe I fight it. And then if I lose at that point, then I settle it. Otherwise, here, though, it's going to draw a lot of attention, maybe more than they want. Frankly, for the family, this is much closer than the case in Florida, which was absolutely going nowhere. And they may decide, because they did make an error, causation is a separate thing, like Julie says, but maybe they decide to settle it and cut their losses.
And Joe, real quick, other police departments, I think, are going to be looking at this case.
Oh, yeah, no doubt about it. They're going to look and see how much liability they potentially have if they get a call wrong, even if the causation is separate. Utah, they might be a little bit better off because it's cause and fact. It has to be the cause. But in other states where negligence can be a cause, then they may have a problem.
Yeah, this is a lawsuit that I think we're going to follow carefully and see which way it ultimately develops. Coming up on Law&Crime Daily, 3 men convicted in the murder of unarmed black man Ahmaud Arbery are sentenced in federal court. Plus, a father of one of the victims of the Parkland school shooting sits down with Law & Crime amid a break in the gunman's penalty phase trial. And welcome back. The 3 men convicted in the 2020 shooting death of Ahmaud Arbery are sentenced in federal court. Father and son Gregory and Travis McMichael and their neighbor William Roddy Bryan were previously convicted in state court and sentenced to life in prison for the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. This after they armed themselves to chase down the unarmed black man, assuming he was a burglar. A federal jury in February found McMichaels and Bryan killed Arbery because of his race. They were also found guilty of federal kidnapping charges. Attorneys assigned to the defendants previously requested their clients be sentenced to federal prison for their own safety. All 3 men are already serving life sentences for their convictions in state court. On Monday, Travis and Gregory were both given second life sentences plus 10 and 7 years respectively for their federal hate crime convictions, and Bryan was sentenced to 35 years late Monday afternoon. So, Joe, I guess the question is, what is the difference between being locked up in federal prison versus state prison?
Namely, it tends to be safer. You're more likely to deal with white-collar criminals, folks that are less violent, etc. So you add that along with the notion that in Georgia, things would be very hot, as it were, with them being in state prison, and they would fear for their safety. Perhaps if they're out of state somewhere else, that there'd be a little less, relative sensitivity to the issue. So between that and them being less safe, the prisons being considered more safe on the federal side, they would prefer to be on the federal side as opposed to the state where your criminals are a lot more violent.
Julie, somebody could look at this and say they were already locked away in life in prison. So what do these sentences mean, considering they already had life in prison on the state charges?
You're right. Not in a sense, not much, because they're already, at least with regards to Travis McMichael and his father, they're already serving life sentences in state court. So they're never getting out no matter what. Whereas with Roddy Bryan, it's a little different because his sentence was, there was a potential for parole in his state case. The one thing it does, though, is keep in mind they're going to appeal. And if they are not successful with their state appeal, keep in mind they still have to appeal the federal case. So it's going to be tough to get 2 bites of the apple in terms of trying to get their cases disposed of in a way that's positive for them. So at least these sentences make that much more difficult for each of the defendants.
Julie, were you surprised 35 years for Bryan?
I wasn't. I think it was important for the judge to distinguish the behavior between each of the 3 men and show the sentences that were appropriate for those that pulled the trigger versus that individual that participated but potentially had less culpability than the two major players.
Yeah, it's definitely a major development in a story that first started with a cell phone video and has worked its way through state court and now federal court. And it's just incredible to see how it started and where it ultimately ended up. New Mexico investigators say a fourth murder of a Muslim man may be connected to 3 other similar killings. Officials in Albuquerque announced at a press conference over the weekend that they have reason to believe that the killing of a man last week is related to killings of other Muslim men in the area. 2 members of the same mosque were murdered in the last 2 weeks, and investigators already determined their killings were connected. Detectives are trying to determine if their deaths are related to another murder in November of last year and the 4th killing last week. Police say the victims were all ambushed with no warning and fired upon and killed. There's a $15,000 reward for information that helps lead to an arrest. The FBI is now assisting in the investigation in addition to local officials. At a press conference, Albuquerque Police Department Chief Harold Medina said they are using every possible resource to bring the killer to justice.
I want to send the same message to the entire community. They're putting every possible resource into these investigations. Our top priority is keeping the community safe. We're asking the Muslim community especially to be vigilant, to watch out for one another. If you see something, say something, report it to police. We have also increased the priority of any of our calls involving the Muslim community, which may be a disturbance or any type of incident which could lead to further injury of anybody from that community. You know, historically, if we look at these types of incidents across the country, it's that community tip that helps solve these cases and bring justice to the families that are impacted. In the city of Albuquerque, our strength is our diversity. We're an extremely diverse community. We're a melting pot of different cultures. And I'm asking all of Albuquerque to stand strong with our Muslim community. Evil will not prevail.
When we come back, the Parkland school shooting penalty phase trial takes a week-long break, and we sit down with one victim's father who created an organization for change in his daughter's name. Welcome back, everybody. I had the incredible opportunity to sit down with the father of one of the victims of the Parkland school shooting. This is the penalty phase trial for the gunman takes a break this week. 14-year-old Gina Montalto was one of the 17 students and staff members who was killed on Valentine's Day in 2018 at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. Her father, Tony, started an organization in her name after the mass shooting to help students with the cost of post-secondary education and make charitable donations to causes his daughter supported. Tony testified at the penalty phase trial wearing the suit that he wore to the last father-daughter dance he attended with Gina. As I sat down with him, he told me what needs to happen to make schools safer.
I think that, but the idea of doing nothing is unacceptable. The idea of, well, it's not going to be perfect, so we won't do anything. We have to stop that thinking. We have to come together as an American family. If you go into a room full of Republicans and ask who wants safe schools, everybody raises their hands. You go in a room full of Democrats and ask that same question, everyone raises their hands. We have to start looking at what unites us here. We are the United States of America, and we have to stop bickering with the far left and the far right and start coming together as an American family to make our students and teachers safer at school.
So, Joe, when I spoke to Tony, he walked me through their efforts for the last 4 years to make changes on the legislative front, and it was amazing to hear everything that they've been doing. But as I was listening and I wanted to talk to you about it, do you think that we can be in a position to ensure that there's not another Parkland or Sandy Hook or Uvalde in the future?
We couldn't totally ensure it in any event. Can we make it less likely? So that question becomes, in turn, what about the conditions that created this instance? Are they more likely to continue to occur? There's a mental health element, and people recognize that, and that's out there, and maybe in recent legislation that's been addressed somewhat. There's an idea of school safety, Uvalde. There's an argument that some other things could have been done in that regard by the police who did nothing. But at the end of the day, it's about the culture of violence and the ease of purchase of firearms. you still have to deal with that one way or the other. And without dealing with that, I think that that's the single most important element that's going to help, along with the others, to hopefully get to a place to make this less likely.
And what was interesting about speaking with Tony is he focused so much attention not even on the gun control debate, but more so finding the warning signs, which it seemed that both sides could agree on, that was a common factor in all of these shootings. Now, Julie, just going back to the trial for a second, there is this 2-week delay, and I'm curious, this 2-week delay before the defense begins, is that an advantage to them?
Let me be clear when I say whether they put it over for 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, 20 years, the jury has been impacted permanently for what they've heard already from the victims and the family members of the individuals that passed away and were injured. So I don't think it really, at the end of the day, matters. Does it give them a little more time to cross their T's and dot their I's for things perhaps they missed when the prosecution was going through the case, of course. But do I think it's going to matter in any way, shape, or form to this jury when they're listening to the mitigation? Absolutely, absolutely not.
It is an uphill battle for this defense to try to save the life of their client after everything this jury has seen. Joe, Julie, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And everyone out there, thanks for joining us here on Law and Crime Daily. We'll see you next time as we discuss justice in America. Take care.